Thank you.
Now we are live.
Just give it a minute for participants to join. Yeah, there's lots of people joining, the numbers going up. Just give it a minute. Good morning and good afternoon. If you've joined us, we will get started in just 1 minute while people join the call. Okay, let's get started then. On behalf of Arise US, my name is Peter Williams. I would like to wish a warm welcome to everybody joining this symposium on digital technology and disaster risk reduction. The idea of this symposium is to try to take a balanced view between the opportunities that digital technology offers and some of the risks and downsides that inevitably come with it. How do we balance those? What kind of protocols do we need? What kind of solutions are out there? What kind of unmet needs are there out there as well? Welcome to the symposium. We will be structured in an event with two separate panels, one reviewing the issues, one reviewing potential solutions and remaining gaps. At the top of the next hour, there will be a 2-minute break to allow people just to step away if they need to, dividing the two panels. So without much further ado, I'm going to introduce our keynote speaker, Deborah Johnson. Deborah is a founder of the Arise US Network and an independent advisor on resilience. Her career with DuPont afforded her opportunities few others have had to work at the intersections of sustainability and disaster risk reduction, and that continues to be her focus today. Over the past decade, she's been engaging in technological advancements as both as an advisor and through her volunteer efforts, for example, with Arise. As such, Deborah provides research, training, and guidance to those seeking to optimize digital technologies for disaster risk reduction and resilience. Deborah, over to you.
Well, thank you, Peter. So, as many of you know, the first national disaster to heavily rely on technology in the United States was Hurricane Sandy in 2021. According to the Federal Emergency Management System, the 2 days prior, during, and the 5 days following the storm resulted in users sending more than 20 million Sandy-related tweets. The Red Cross, FEMA, and more than 20 million, and several local response agencies participated and began a new journey in crisis communications. Something to keep in mind when listening to our panelists today is how that tech, although basic, was available to everyone to use as they needed. Since then, the use of local media and the Internet of Things have gained solid footing in hazard response and short-term recovery efforts. More and more, these technologies connect people to people, people to resources, and people to their environment by sharing real-time conditions fast and efficiently. Many of these systems integrate with drones, satellites, cameras, sensors, meters, and alarms, with the capacity to collect massive amounts of data across events. This is where big data and blockchain enter with the ability to store, process, aggregate, and analyze that data. Given that, it may not surprise you when I say technologies to improve decision-making and accelerate actions to reduce disaster risks have skyrocketed. But what is surprising is that the use of these technologies has not. More specifically, the development and availability of the technologies that collect and aggregate and analyze data to reduce our risks are really not an issue. moving these into widespread consideration and use is. So what's standing in the way? First, we're conflicted when it comes to the use of technologies. It's truly an approach avoidance relationship. At one end, there's the opinion that technology is the answer to solving our problems. And this can lead to something called solutionism, or the belief that by applying some technology successfully, you've solved the entire problem. On the other side is the belief that relying too heavily on tech can blur our view to other more natural solutions, and perhaps those that are simpler, more affordable, accessible, equitable, and trusted. Just because technology can do something doesn't necessarily mean it should, or that it does it best. But if it's a better and more powerful solution, what we want to know is how those developing it are ensuring that the technology's purpose and its performance are well informed and aligned with those that will use, deploy, and rely on it. Trust by itself is another potential barrier. To trust, we must understand. That understanding is not easy to obtain, especially given technology's rapid development. And those developments are mostly in completely unfamiliar, unseeable, and even unimaginable domains for most of us. Tech can also be fragile with its reliance on power sources, and we're often unable to fix anything quickly. It's also open to cyber risks and privacy issues, all of this contributing to a lack of visibility and transparency. So as a result, it isn't very hard to reason why digital technologies are slow to be adopted and implemented in the spaces where lives, livelihoods, and entire communities and their economies are at risk. At the same time, there's much to be gained from tackling these hurdles and accelerating adoption and deployment, especially in those vulnerable and exposed communities most in need. Arise's 36 networks around the world are aligned with the UN Office of Disaster Risk Reduction's mission. That mission is to accelerate global efforts in order to achieve inclusive sustainable development and the goal of the Sendai framework. The framework's goal is made up of targets that are aimed at substantially increasing the number of national and local disaster risk reduction strategies, the international cooperation for DRR, the number of and accessibility to multi-hazard early warning systems, and access to risk assessments and information. Together, these then contribute to substantial reductions in the number of people lost to disasters, the number of people affected, the direct economic loss, and the degree of damage to critical infrastructure and the resulting disruption to basic services. So whether focused on early warning systems in response or the role of reducing greenhouse gases to mitigate future risks, technology innovations will inevitably be part of the mix. So each of us face a number of questions. Foremost, how do we reconcile our concerns and uncertainties to ensure that in adopting and deploying our tech solutions, we are not, in fact, increasing and accumulating risk? How do we learn, teach, and develop the capacities that enable us and our colleagues to be more aligned, confident, and strategic in our decisions and choices for the use of these technologies? And where are the resources, support, and guidance for all of this? Today's discussions are aimed at exactly these topics and more. As we move to our panels, we invite you to engage by sharing your thoughts and questions in the chat box and Q&A. So with this, let me turn it over to the panel. Camilla, over to you.
All right, thank you so much, Deborah, and good afternoon, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Camila Tapias. I am a global disaster resilience specialist at Spain Global. We are a US-based public benefit company, and we exist to disrupt disasters from neighborhoods to nations. In our company, I lead our business and industry and international practice areas, as well as our risk reduction program area. And I focus on building public-private and private-public partnerships and help our clients and partners solve the most pressing needs. And with our Arise US network, I am the communications director and also support our membership processes. So very glad to be here today. So with our first panel, we'll be focused on issues with technology and their impacts on disaster risk reduction. Our first panelists are incredible, and they will cover diverse topics and different case studies. So we have Tom Baumann with Climate Change Coalition, Dr. Jack Crumbley with Tuskegee University, and also Neil Cohn with Code Green. So our first panelist, Tom Baumann, he is the chair of the Climate Change Coalition, which is a global multi-stakeholder network co-founded with the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, with over 360 organization members in 69 countries to advance digital for climate. And Tom started his work in sustainability in the early 90s, including global standard organizations, serving as chair of the ISO's International Committee on Climate Change Standards. And he started his digital solutions, his work with digital solutions in the late 2000s, including several startups to apply digital solutions for climate and sustainability. Tom, the floor is yours. So if we can start sharing this presentation, that would be great.
Thank you very much, Camilla, for the introduction. Just doing a sound check. All good?
All good.
Thank you very much. And thanks to Rise US and all the organizers for this event. I'm happy to be involved in it to discuss a little bit of the state of play on digital for climate in general, but very happy to be part of this event because it's quite refreshing to take this non-hype approach to reality check on how digital or the right digital can be useful for addressing the climate emergency and UNDRR in particular. Next slide, please. So the Climate Change Coalition, it's a nonprofit organization, and as Camilla mentioned, it was co-founded with the UNFCCC Secretariat back in 2017 at COP23, where there was just an immense interest in using digital solutions in support of the Paris Agreement, with mitigation as sort of a lead application. And at that time, quite a lot of hype about these technologies. Everybody was coming to market the usual digital will save us type of attitude. And we knew better. There was already enough challenges within climate per se, and bringing in such an innovative, rapidly evolving space like digital needed to be done very carefully. So we started the coalition as a global multi-stakeholder network. That's not only the digital solution providers, but academia, government, NGOs, the whole array to provide that 360 perspective. I believe everyone recognizes that the users are central. User-centric solutions are key for their adoption to be adopted well. And so we, next slide, please. We started to build out a network by connecting all of these various types of stakeholders who spoke different languages. And I don't mean English, French, Spanish. I mean climate jargon, digital jargon, and they talked right by each other, even within their community. So starting at a very basic level of how do we get the conversation productive and not just simply talking past each other. Over the first 5 years, we started from just 12 organizations to 360 organizations, and they're in 69 countries. Next slide, please. So just go over this very quickly. Here's a few examples. The organizations are often nonprofits in the digital space, and there's several listed on the screen, different blockchain platforms or IoT alliances, NGOs, and of course, many, many entrepreneurs. And that provides a really interesting mix of perspectives on, what's working within digital and what's not, or what should be included. Next slide, please. And so at COP27, we did a stock take report of our first 5 years and announced our strategy. Here's a few examples of what we were able to assess from our member database, and I'll focus on just one. Next slide, please. And that is as it relates to priorities, applications of digital solutions. Initially, finance, markets, carbon markets in particular, were seen as top priorities, and they are largely. Adaptation was not really a big issue, but last year, as part of the COP focus areas in general, adaptation really became a priority. In fact, over 40% of our members saw adaptation as a priority area. Next slide, please, which is the basis for focusing on adaptation and resilience, disaster DRR in general, emergency response and so on, as one of the new focus areas that we're calling a lab to take more or less grassroots, member-driven cooperation to a much more structured approach to bringing together digital solutions within adaptation and resilience issues. Next slide, please. I know we're tight on time, so I won't take too much on the intros. So in particular, the Climate Change Lab is being co-led by Adaptation Leader, one of Arise US members. It's a not-for-profit out of the US, as well as with Arise US itself and some other networks involving thousands of practitioners and policymakers. Really, the subject matter domain experts, along with the Climate Change Coalition membership, where there are a variety of different digital stakeholders, whether this the solution providers or academia or standards developers and so on, to really build out a framework and a roadmap that will be more effective in engaging stakeholders. Next slide, please. Last slide, and these are really the key issues for us. Connecting the stakeholders across the communities. So within adaptation, climate more broadly speaking, where there are some brethren that would like to, if at all possible, be beneficial to the space of adaptation, and the digital technologies and associations who would like to cooperate more effectively. There is no shortage of these initiatives in one form or another around the world, but to really make them effective, how can we incentivize that engagement amongst stakeholders? That's really addressing one of the key issues, which is real solutions for those to develop, because there's quite a lot of hype. You'll see every day, if you're looking carefully, some new solutions announced, but still suffering from the age-old vaporware reality. How do we get past that into more real solutions, and to do that, incentivizing people to stick to it and help build out these solutions, because it is a long-term process. It's not a quick fix. And then secondly, as was mentioned previously, compiling the resources. What are the current activities? What are their real performance like? Are they doing well or not? Next, agreeing to a shared taxonomy for the digital infrastructure. What does that look like? What's it built on? What are the standards and roadmaps for that as well? And then advancing the best practices, the real practical working solutions that are going to be context specific. They're going to match a specific set of needs and users, which really represent the right digital solution for that need, rather than something that's been over digitized and doesn't represent the best value for money or for ease of use and all of those other factors. So in the context of the Climate Change Coalition and sort of building out this global network of stakeholders, these are sort of the key issues and a roadmap that we think are essential to try to build a strong foundation from which we can inform ourselves on what are the serious issues that we can address with practical solutions and make the progress. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks very much. And back to you, Camilla.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tom. We already have a few questions that will, when we do a facilitated discussion, we'll expand so you can add more information to your presentation. So I'm going now for our second panelist, Dr. Jack Crumbly. He obtained his PhD from Jackson State University and is currently an associate professor in the Andrew F. Brimmer College of Business and Information Science at Tuskegee University. He received his Bachelor of Science in Marketing from Grambling State University and his MBA, specializing in Management Information System from Wright State University. His interests include measuring supply chain value through reverse logistics, information technology, and pricing, among others. And prior to pursuing his PhD, he was an information technology consultant for the United States Air Force Research Laboratory, specializing in the database administration and IT application design. Over to you, Dr. Jack.
Thank you, Camilla. We really appreciate the opportunity. My apologies for being a tad bit late. I'm still doing the day job of education here at Tuskegee. So as Ms. Tapia said, I'm Dr. Jack Crumbly, and today we're gonna next slide, please. We're gonna talk about what we've done so far with digital technology and supply chain risks. So in my journey. As an academic, have a huge passion for supply chain management. But one of the experiences that I had when at Jackson State University is Hurricane Katrina. Now the hurricane did not damage the city of Jackson. However, the majority of New Orleans moved to Mississippi right after it. And one of the things that I remember witnessing is lots of opportunities to ask for donations, etc. And many people were donating everything from prom dresses to whatever you can imagine. As Peter's laughing. So this created other issues. Really a second disaster. And I don't. So I'm going to pivot to 2023 to talk about some of the challenges that I've had or that I've seen with supply chain. So if you I was listening to Tom, and he was referring to and I'll try to tie some of the components that he mentioned in his presentation with what we're doing. So lots of challenges, particularly with a lot of organizations that we work with just a lot of transparency and trust. So I've collaborated with the Auburn University RFID Lab, and they have various partners from retail to lots of retailers, a lot of super retailers actually. And one of the challenges that they have is just really trust and lots of shrinkage. It's as Peter knows, lots of theft, lots of reduction in inventory. And one of the things that I think that organizations are looking for is a solution to remedy that. So one of the examples I provided in this example is Nike's Nike scenario with almost $1 million of theft in shoes. Can you go to the next slide, please? I have some photos, I think, of the scenario. Yes. So Nike with this theft. H&M with burning clothes rather than delivering them. All of these things are challenges in the supply chain, and the reason why we have this issue is, again, lack of trust and fear of reducing value in the brand. So what are ways in resolving this issue? So next slide, please. Okay, so one of the things that I've been involved with is a project using blockchain with, again, multiple retailers, IT companies, not a manufacturer yet, but that's the hope. So the project really looked at using a Hyperledger as an opportunity to provide a permissioned, using a blockchain to provide permissioned access to partners. So the idea was to provide transparency for all, but I'll just be using examples, using apparel company A, being able to see their inventory, but not apparel company B's or C's. And one of the challenges again is really just a trust scenario. Another issue was tracking, being able to accurately track using RFID tags, and because when you're tracking particularly using RFID technology, regardless of whether you're using a blockchain or not, it's the level of accuracy is a challenge. Now, this is pre-pandemic. The hope is to actually move forward with this project again. But next slide, please. One of the challenges that's seen particularly post-pandemic is the opportunity to really use blockchain again, because there has been some initial investments in blockchain, but not lots of great results. So there's, I won't say a phobia, but definitely some challenges. One of the things that I'm working with a group with is really blockchain governance. So as I mentioned in the previous slides, there are issues with trust, there's issues with transparencies. One of the things that our group is looking at is the role of blockchain governance. So you see I define IT governance on the slide and blockchain governance also on the slide. So we're looking at these 4 Ps and incentives model, basically to provide trust, or at least give folks some incentives to really follow standards. One thing, as Tom discussed, is the role of standards is a challenge. How do you, if I have a certain standard in moving products, and someone else has a different standard, how can we follow? How can we all follow the same standard? So that creates really problems for 3PLs, et cetera, to move everyone's product while making it transparent. So the hope is a combination of using governance will provide this various level of transparency, which will improve, okay, thanks, which will improve transparency and trust. Next slide, please. So I'll add one more minute, Camille. So again, that was the end of the presentation. But overall, the hope is to use blockchain governance as and standardization. I'm working on 2 projects as a way to provide this opportunity for people to trust and for products to move. So I appreciate your time. Looking forward to questions if you have any at the end of the session.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Now, last but not least, our third panelist for this first panel is Neil Cohn. He's the co-founder and CEO of Code Green. Neil is a blockchain and sustainable finance expert who was instrumental in developing the early markets for carbon and renewable energy. And more recently, Neil has led the development of the foundational digital architecture for carbon trading, which is a collaboration with the World Bank in Singapore to build a climate action data trust, and also a partnership with the IFC to structure standardized carbon tokens to democratize access to climate finance. All right, go ahead, Neil.
Hi, thank you, Camilla. I don't have any slides, so I'm just gonna jump in and try to cover a few points that I think are important, and hopefully leave more time for questions. So really the main points that I'd like to bring across as we look at this, I am a huge proponent of decentralization and tech for good. You know, for the first part of my career, I was really focused on using market mechanisms for good, but it became very obvious to me after being involved in carbon markets since the 90s that as it became possible to use these markets again after the Paris Agreement was really adopted, how could we leverage the technologies, the AI, the IoT, the geospatial data, and even blockchain? How can we leverage these technologies to do better, to create projects that are not just these mega projects because it was too difficult, but can be smaller and more impactful and more cost effective. How do we use this to scale and build better markets? How do we use these technologies? How do we leverage the technologies to do good? And what hit me as I looked at, Bitcoin, which was an interesting, phenomena, and then Ethereum, which took it further, saying, hey, as long as we're using computers, let's insert, smart contract code. It's that decentralization is great. It really can do good, but the original vision of it, empowering the underbanked and all of the things that we heard, I really believe that we need a little bit of a reboot. I think that we need to understand that decentralization means radical inclusion and empowerment. And my first point is that, it needs to be decentralization to enable everybody to be on more of a level pitch. And it should not be about, disintermediation of really critical authorities. We have governments for a reason. We have the UN and all of the good they've brought. We've been in 30 years of climate negotiations to get to the point where we are today. And many parties came in and said, hey, this is just like Bitcoin. We can go in there and make up our own rules. And, we see what happens. It leads to nefarious activity, to things that are the exact opposite of inclusion and empowerment. It's human trafficking, it's drug trafficking, it's tax evasion, it's things that hurt society. So it is that balance of recognizing that we have to be regulatory compliant, we have to use this technology for good, and really make sure that we shift the paradigm to help the population that really is at most at risk to these global challenges, to disasters, to climate disasters, and to economic and health disasters that they're currently facing. The second point I'd like to make is that, I came into this looking for tech to solve challenges, and I think I invested in 3 or 4 companies until I really found one that started to actually have some technology that actually was usable. And most of these technologies started out as pilots, and they never really moved to the next level. They would get fresh coats of paint, and they'd get a little bit tweaked, and ultimately, we need tech that's deployed to solve these challenges, and not what we've seen a lot of, where tech that's been built without a good use case is leveraging the climate crisis and other global challenges as a reason, as a use case. And in those situations, we've been jamming a square peg in a round hole, and it's been problematic. So we need to make sure that we should try to coalesce around technologies that are really helpful, and all tech, really recognize that all technology, there's a checklist. It's got to be, is it good for the economy? Of course, it's got to be economically viable. Is it good for people? Is it good for the planet? And if you're missing a box, Bitcoin, yeah, really cool, good technology, but it hurt the planet. Ultimately, it created more of disparity and the huge energy use and the waste of resources. So a lot of good, but I'm going to say I think it's a false messiah. It was, it brought us somewhere, and bringing into contracts with Ethereum, the same thing, but we can continue to get better, and we shouldn't stop. We're still in the early stages of this technology. Last, I think that, not last, actually, I'll say the third point is that we need to make sure that tech and the communities try to work in a way with agreeing to the higher principles. And one of those needs to be compatibility or interoperability at some level, so that we create technology that actually has a path forward and doesn't just create confusion. I think a lot of the people, it's very difficult to figure out the difference between this tech and that. And if you're not comfortable with it, you tend to, the studies that show when you go to the grocery store and there's 14 kinds of jelly, you're not going to buy one. But if there's 3, you're going to taste one and pick one. In these situations, I think we need to really clarify what the differences are and how these technologies can work together, because some of the silly marketing battles and hyperbole, it doesn't help anyone. And it's really, especially when you're taking, I'll compare this. If you look at where we are in climate, for instance, we've spent 30 years. I've been involved since the 90s on early, negotiations and then early markets. And I'd say, climate is now a young adult. It's functional. It's hitting its stride. We're actually getting somewhere. But yet we bring in blockchain and you've got a volatile teenager that is still fighting and figuring it out and getting things wrong. And when you try to combine them, we're causing disruption when we cannot afford to have these issues. We can't afford to delay. So we need to come to higher principles and recognize that these risks are far greater than anyone's profit, and we need to recognize where the priorities need to be. I'm also going to say that decentralized systems. I think I really believe in decentralization and decentralized systems, but most are not really looking at data in a way that's very useful. And data sharing needs to be done to manage the risks of open data, and putting data on blockchain is often not the most intelligent way to use blockchain. Blockchain is not a solution for everything. I think there are situations and ways to use data correctly on blockchain, but the way that I first saw this, you were going to take that data and you were going to lock it up, and it was like taking my bicycle and locking it to a tree. I could point to it and say, hey, that's my bicycle, but I couldn't use it. And eventually it killed the tree. So if we look at this and how can we change that? And there are systems now able to use that data in a dynamic way where we can take it and protect individuals and organizations from negative impacts, protect proprietary information, use systems that are more permissionable and dynamic in the way they work. And that's what we're trying to develop. And last is that if we build these systems, these decentralized systems, if we build data systems that are living, they're dynamic, they can change as the data changes, and they can be used again and again for multiple issues, for climate, for global risks, for healthcare, for built environment, all of these things. If we do this correctly and we create the right foundational tools, which is what that's what we need to do, is work on the foundational tools, and then also make sure that we keep in mind ethics and these risks, because when we lose sight of that is when we end up in problems. I'll let it go there and hopefully get to other things and questions. But thank you, guys.
All right, well, thank you so much, Neil, Tom, and Dr. Jack. So we have a lot of questions from the audience, but I'm going to start with you, Tom. We have some questions here. First, what are some of the challenges with data privacy? And I know you talked a lot about your experience with climate change standards and developing a lot of this, and in particular with your experience with who is involved in the development of that taxonomy that you explained, and that correlation with data privacy issues.
There's a good example of me struggling with technology then, and there are too many monitors and screens open at the same time. Thanks for the questions. Let me start with the last one in terms of who would be involved in the taxonomies. My opinion, the more the better. Of course, there's the communities of the digital technologies, and they're often bundled together for particular applications in sectors like land use and agriculture, remote sensing, and big data, and so on, versus industry and energy, where they have digital sensors all over the place. And how are those combined with blockchain, smart contracts, or other types of technologies? Once we create a hybrid, what's the taxonomy of how those work? Are they doing monitoring, reporting? Are they providing some assurance? Is it related to finance? All of the above. And how does that link to shared platforms? So the digital technologies for sure. And then, of course, the domain of DRR and adaptation and resilience, cooperating with the RISE US and its networks and its members, like Adaptation Ledger and CAPS, the climate adaptation policymakers and practitioners and scholars community with thousands of domain experts to help bridge together what are the evolving taxonomies within DRR and adaptation that are being standardized from process solutions, planning, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation. How does that link with the digital? So bringing those communities together to develop a taxonomy that bridges their own community taxonomies. And then in terms of privacy and trust, Deborah mentioned that early on. One of the reasons why we created the Climate Change Coalition was there's so many move fast and break things, which, okay, that might be okay in Silicon Valley, but when there's already crisis of trust, at least in the mitigation areas of climate markets, a day doesn't go by without Bloomberg or some other major news source highlighting greenwashing and so on. And so rushing to bring in some of these digital bullets to try to sort of salvage what trust is there, at the same time not taking such risks that they could undermine that fragile trust of many of the stakeholders, not only on is our numbers real, like whether it's emissions or it's the impact, physical impact, but on where's the finance going and who's that benefiting, and because that's part of this whole solution, right? To more equitably in a just transition, involve stakeholders, and so to have that trust for their participation is crucial.
Thank you, Tom. I don't know if it was just me at the end. I think your headphone set was kind of buffering a little bit. I don't know if it was just me. It didn't sound as clear.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't.
Okay.
I like to just chime in just a little bit, just to support what Tom is saying. One of the things that I'm a part of a group that's looking at transportation identification types of data. And one of the challenges that I've seen, that I was talking about in my presentation, really that standardization of data. And so I think when you look at freight, you have so many types of different data scenarios that you need kind of like a uniform scenario of data support. So right now with a group that's looking to do that, at least from a freight perspective. We'll see what happens. But again, that level of standardization everybody supports is definitely critical. It's almost like every group, whether it's rail or shipping or other forms, really have lots of different scenarios in which people just don't support or they don't support one another. So I really think the standardization part, as Tom was saying, is really important. So Tom has his hand raised up, so I will stop.
If I may, if time permits, I'd like to follow on what Jack was saying. I'm very happy to hear what you said and completely concur and want to share sort of a good example of the importance there. And we're at an early stage of planning a roadmap for standardization and simply, okay, what's the boundary of what's going to be standardized or not? And we're doing it in the context of digitizing measurement, reporting, and verification, similar to monitoring and evaluation. And to the point on data, how important that is, couldn't agree more. The devices that are either generating or somehow managing that data, not only are we trying to digitize verification, but we're trying to verify digitization. And believe it or not, there's huge disagreement on whether
Correct, it is.
those devices.
Correct, it is.
And so that standardization, come up with a really good strategy and roadmap that we all concur, and then start to build it out in modular fashion for, especially in adaptation, try to compress that overall timeline to develop that body of standards so that it's optimal, especially within digital context. Those looking holistically like that early on is better than otherwise.
Yeah, I know last year or the year before, we were talking about volume and all this ridiculous amounts of volume that we were going to manage. Now is really about, okay, can we compress and standardize at least some of these components so that one TEU from China can be moved and followed and trusted. So I think once we kind of get that down, then I think the rest will definitely be improvement, particularly with some of the questions they were asked about do we have the technology to support various disasters? The answer is yes, but again, do we have the trust across organizations to move processes?
So I have a question here for Neil in particular that we have from the audience. I think it really ties into, we're talking about the trust and collaboration. And you know that you talk about Tom and Jack in particular, the role of, that finance and insurance as well here. So we know that a handful of accelerating technologies and trends are poised to basically transform this nature of insurance, as claims are going to start being processed after disasters could be more automated, right, scalable, and way more fast. But what do you think, Neil, about that tokenization of insurance? I know from that climate finance experience that you also have there.
I'm gonna make one quick comment on the discussion on supply chain, and I'll move over if you don't mind, Camilla. On supply chain, I just want to say one thing that no one's really talking about, but I think is, to me, it's like a subprime kind of a risk. I'm doing quite a bit in supply chain, working with global banks, doing programs, lending programs with multilateral banks in countries that want to see supply chain risk. And as we all know, scope 3, which are the upstream or downstream of a major corporation, are typically the scope 1, the direct emissions of an SME, of a smaller company. What we're facing is that these companies are able to choose factors, and the factors they're choosing are typically a salad of factors that are so wide in what they actually are. We have the potential that as we start to really say we're going to decarbonize the entire supply chain, we're going to decarbonize the full scope of what we're doing, they're not going to match up to what the governments actually have. And we're going to see a massive chasm between what's being claimed and what the reality is, that I don't see how we ever bridge that gap. So we need to see more either direct measurements, agreed supply type things that are more realistic and followed up on. And my fear is right now, everyone's saying, great, do your supply chain. And I'm doing a lot, and we're finding, we do have systems to protect data, share it in ways that are actually permissionable, which are cool. But my big fear are these factors that are going to possibly spring a big surprise on us within the next 2 years. Sorry, going to the insurance part, I'm not an expert on this, but I'll just say briefly what I think is interesting from my experience on it. Insurance means to get paid off on insurance, you need to show not that something's happened, but that you had a loss. That's a very big difference than an option. So if I have an option on something, right, I tokenize that, if so-and-so happens, I get paid. That works. But in insurance, I have to then go and say, so-and-so happened. Now I must prove my loss against that. That's difficult. That's hugely costly. And that's, again, massive variables. So you look at the global risks and why insurance is so expensive. It's because, again, there's so much uncertainty. So what could we be using? I don't know if it's tokenization or ways to monitor and actually pay against real instances and real occurrences. But I think that all of the misappropriated monies that go to insurance companies are coming out. That's part of what's making insurance so expensive and unaffordable and difficult in situations. So maybe finding better technology to fix the entire system, not just how we tokenize the actual product, and looking more at an option type of an insurance rather than the current model of proving loss. Sorry.
Thank you. And I know this conversation about standardization and for this technologies in particular, and I think that for the next panel we'll also you hear more about the equitable side of things with technology and the challenges, but in particular as we know climate change and disasters do not affect all people equally, and some communities are disproportionate, have different impacts because of existing vulnerabilities and historical patterns of inequity, as well as socioeconomic disparities. But this is for the group in particular. What are some of those strategies that you can think of to incorporate this climate equity considerations into digital technologies and policies, taking into account these challenges that you have already, that you've talked about already. So Jack, if you want to maybe start.
If I'm trying to repeat the question, so based on processes, what digitization processes?
Right. What are some strategies that you can think of to incorporate climate equity considerations
Oh,
into
sure.
technology?
Great. Okay. Great question. I think from just piggybacking off of what Neil was saying, he is right. There are lots of variables, and you have lots of global partners, and so that creates the lack of transparency. I think that really the transparency is very, very important. Therefore, going back to the importance of standardization. Now, question is, do we bring development and production back to the do we shrink that back to the states, or do we shrink that back to regional spaces? If we do, what are the repercussions, particularly with some of our partners such as China, et cetera? Because if you look at just production and the way production is being developed, it is creating lots of waste, because we have this one-way funnel of particularly from products from North America from China to, or Southeast Asia to North America. Again, once you have it, then how do you manage it and sustain it? What options do you have? And right now, it seems like everything's going one way, and the only other thing we have is just all this trash, etc. No, very little reverse logistics or circular economy opportunity. So you have lots of companies, IBM being one of them. Not a sponsor of I love IBM. IBM supports Tuskegee University, but just if you look at some of the things that they're looking at doing with regard with data management. Question is, what are we doing with these products? Are we doing secondary? Are we creating secondary products? What are happening to those secondary products, et cetera? So,
any other comments, Tom, maybe for that equity considerations into standards and policy?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind for me is my own experience. We had a pretty rough weather event here last year, and I know a lot of places around the world are, but adaptation has become a big issue within our city, political discussions and taxation, because we simply weren't ready for many of these floods, or the sewer systems back up, or windstorm blows your house down, or ruins stuff. And what can we do as individuals to help mitigate the impacts? Whether everything from diverting water away and rain barrels, anything you can imagine. And then how is that reflected in a more fair taxation policy for folks who are proactive with some they do anything, and then the rest of us will have to help pay for that, or in one way or the other. So I'd love to see how digital twins or what we're doing, and it could be with photographs. When the insurance company came out here to prove loss, they had drones and stuff come around, take all of the pictures, press of a button. Oh, that's how much is going to be the claim. How can we use that in a way that helps reduce the costs on folks while they could do sort of small things individually to improve our resilience to those impacts. So I'd love to see something that empowers citizens and incents them to reduce their tax costs or insurance costs or whatever.
Yeah, let me support. I'm sorry, just real quick. To me, being a person of faith, it seems like God is adapting, and we're accustomed to a traditional stamp of processes, but it seems like nature through God is making changes. So as business organizations, how can we, or as a body of academics, how can we really adapt to these new normals? Again, in the 1900s they did, but now we have a 2 and 3.0. So how can we adapt to these acts while maintaining our global global variables, global components of processes.
I'm gonna let Neil chime in as well. I know you emphasized this idea of democratizing access to, you know, climate finance, and in this case, with that equity considerations and standards and policies, what do you think this potential, you know, strategies, and with your experience and what you've been working on so far?
I really think, I mean, look, it's critical to create basically standard models. We had to do that for the climate action data trust that we created with the World Bank in Singapore. That enables sharing in a way that you know is comparable. I think what we've seen here is more and more folks all come in with their own very unique ways to define things, and while technologies can be different, there is something to be said, as Tom said, taxonomy and creating that. I think we also have to be really cautious that, you know, if we can build these systems correctly, they should not be where the big money is being made. The big money should be made in how we deploy these things correctly. If somebody wants to earn this, there's nothing wrong with profit. But right now we're facing multiple crises across the board. And it's not the time for us to be sitting here like, you know, where do I get rich quick on this? And I'll admit, it's easier to say when you know, this is not my first career, frankly, but it is critical that if you want to be a major voice and be out there and help, is your first priority needs to be, how do I help solve this in a way that works? And then great, do I build a fund that invests in the right things? Do I do something else do I create technology that I can deploy? But the technology should not be the platforms themselves where the big money is being made.
Awesome. Well, we are very close here to finish our first panel, but I have one last question, and you become very concise with your answer, all of you. I know a lot of us have heard, you know, there's new trend with ChatGPT, you know, everywhere. I think a lot of us are you know, listening to ChatGPT right now. It's, you know, everywhere. Everyone's talking about this. You know, I'm really curious, what are your thoughts on, you know, some of these issues with having this technology? So a lot of people are really talking about right now with, you know, the benefits, and you know, that's kind of the next panel. We're talking about solutions and more in that emphasis, but you know, very concise. What are your thoughts right now, the challenges that you can see with this technology? I see you smiling. Neil, what do you start?
Well, my wife's not watching. I can just say that my Valentine's poem is really good this year. So ChatGPT is pretty cool. You could do some amazing things with it. You know, but you know, it's all steps, right? I think that, you know, we're in a big learning experiment here. You know, we've got kids that we want to teach to write their own papers and do these things. I don't really see it as a risk. I think it's really cool that AI is getting to the point where there's benefits. Obviously, we'll have to have controls at some point, be careful. But, you know, I think that all technology needs to have a moral compass. You know, everything, you know, we need to be responsible in how we implement. So that's my only opinion. I just think it's funny because honestly, I was really just using it. So
That's great. What about you, Dr. Jack? A few thoughts on some of the issues with this?
Yeah, I mean, in regard, real quick, I think from an academic perspective, when you look at some people still in academia that are that were born in 1940, I think I think there's some challenges, particularly when you think of business acumen and soft skills. Again, I think ChatGPT can probably do some support with that, but again, when you have those traditional modes of people actually having the acumen and people actually having the soft skills, again, I think I think there's going to be some, as Neil just said, some adaptations to using tools such as it. I have not used ChatGPT at this point, but again, have I heard about it? Yes, I think that, and we at Tuskegee University has had some conversation about how to implement ChatGPT, or should that conversation be for folks in computer science, information systems, but again, for traditional business students, that's going to be another scenario as well.
Yep. And Tom, before we go on break, any last thoughts?
Yeah, thanks very much. I also have not used ChatGPT. I'm still waiting for some of the dust to settle. I'm sure AI can be harnessed for good, but we're going to need standards for ethical AI and what they're building in terms of the the values of the programmers and how that gets reinforcing. Is it Western or is it global values? I mean, I could go on and on and on if we don't watch that carefully. And all of us, we don't democratize that rule setting process upon which AI gives back expedient and quality results. We could be looking at a disaster, and I certainly would not want to see such a powerful technology blow itself up because we weren't smart about it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much. I know, Peter, you want to chime in here, but yeah, this was great. I know, wish we had all day to talk about all this topics. I know there's so much to unpack, but thank you all so much for your presentations. And go ahead, Peter.
Camilla, outstanding job in herding the cats. Thank you very much indeed. Chat GPT is really interesting. Just as a thought that occurred to me, a lot of folks will know that Chat GPT can write perfectly passable computer code. And that's its main danger. Somebody will use it to write some code for some critical infrastructure system without checking it properly, and that infrastructure system will break and it will cause damage and or loss of life. One day, ChatGPT is going to be a fantastic boon. Not yet, it ain't. At least not in a mission critical context anyhow. I just leave that thought with you. Folks, we're going to take literally a 2-minute break just to allow people to be comfortable, and we will resume with the second panel chaired by Shefali, and we look forward to it. But thank you very much to our first 3 speakers. Thank you very much to Camilla. Fascinating discussion. I've been taking tons of notes here. Very cool. Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
All right, back in 2 minutes.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Shefali Lakina, Director of the Arise US Network and co-founder of Wonder Labs, a climate justice-focused social enterprise based in San Jose, California. I will be your moderator for this second panel of the Arise US Symposium this afternoon. We will be discussing the potential of digital solutions for disaster risk reduction. We will also identify some open questions and deal with remaining challenges because there are so many, as we just heard. Before I introduce our 3 panelists, I want to spend a couple of minutes setting the stage for this conversation. I will also be inviting in audience questions, so feel free to keep those coming in the chat and I'll be sure to fold them into our discussion. For those of you who have just joined, this is a reminder that we're hosting this symposium as a preparatory event in the lead up to the Americas and Caribbean 8th Regional Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction, which will be held soon from February 28th to March 2nd. Key points and recommendations from this symposium will be presented to the regional platform for further deliberation and actionable next steps. Also, a quick reminder, if you've just joined us, that this panel discussion is being recorded and will be shared on our website soon. Could I have the next slide, please? Now, in the past few years, we've seen how advances in digital technologies have really enhanced the speed and scale at which early warning, disaster response, and recovery can be conducted. But as the first panel just highlighted, quite a few challenges still remain in digital tech's development and deployment, including issues of data quality, access, and interoperability. And as we dive into unpacking some of these issues, I want to encourage us to, for a moment, step back and acknowledge that the broader discussion around the benefits and challenges of digital tech is not in fact new. We've always been concerned with how technology can work for us and better our life experience. And although I can refer you to an entire library of useful readings on the subject, here on the slide, I recommend 4 books that point to certain milestones in how we've been engaging with this discussion over the past years. So back in 1950, Norbert Wiener's thesis on cybernetics weighed the benefits and challenges of automation. Back then, Wiener hoped that machines could amplify the human experience by relieving people from repetitive tasks and free us for more creative pursuits. This discussion may sound familiar in 2023. Enter ChatGPT, as we were just talking about, and not surprisingly, we continue to have conversations around the uses and the benefits of AI and how digital technologies can really enhance the human experience, saving us time, making our lives more efficient, productive, and perhaps creative. In recent years, these discussions have also extended to nanotechnology, biotechnology, geoengineering, carbon markets, blockchain, as we were just hearing, and fintech. And as we enter the 4th industrial revolution, blurring the lines between physical, digital, and biological, we are in an inevitable race after technology. But in American sociologist Ruha Benjamin's usage of that term, a consideration of social biases, including race, gender, and abilities, should not be an afterthought after the technology has already been developed. We're realizing how important it is to be intentional about what technology is created, by whom, and for what purpose. And as we begin to wield the power to catalog and query the whole earth, from forests to watersheds, cities, insects, animals, we're learning more about the nature of data itself. Data is not just in the cloud, this abstract or invisible thing. Data is situated and generated in particular kinds of geographies and infrastructures. But we also know that data infrastructures can be unevenly produced and inequitably accessed. And to address this issue, as we know, we're beginning to leverage open and more democratic Web3 technologies, but challenges remain, which I'm sure we'll get into during our discussion. In the end, as Silicon Valley Congressman Ro Khanna observes in his recent book, we are all seeking dignity in a digital age. Data infrastructure must expand in equitable ways to bridge the urban-rural divide, the gender divide, the race divide, the ableist divide, among others. We want and need technology to work for all of us. That is our starting point today. And these are some of the broader themes that our panel has very bravely agreed to unpack today. We're interested in learning how their initiatives are using digital tech to achieve equitable and sustainable disaster risk reduction outcomes. So let's hear from them now. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So for the rest of this hour, you'll be hearing from 3 innovators in the digital tech space. First up, we have Dr. Ali Mustafavi, who is Associate Director at Texas A&M University and Director of the Urban Resilience AI Lab. Over to you, Ali. Could we please have Ali's slides pulled up?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ali Mustafavi. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at Texas A&M University, and I'm also the director of Urban Resilience AI Lab. Today, I'm pleased to participate on this panel and talk about some of our work in this space of the intersection of big data and AI with disaster risk management and disaster resiliency. This intersection has led to the emergence of a new field that we call smart resilience. It doesn't mean that we have dumb resiliency, but smart resiliency is how we can augment resiliency of communities facing hazards, different types of hazards, with the use of big data and AI. And this paradigm of big data has been enabled by the emergence of new technologies. With the next slide, please. The emergence of information and communication technologies has led the cities and communities to become data factories. So we can harness different types of data that gives us the pulse of a community, both during normal times and also during crisis times. So for example, people are using digital media for their transactions. The people are using cell phones for their different activities, from which we can understand different patterns of behaviors of people during normal times and during crisis times. We have different physical infrastructure sensors, from flood gauges to traffic network sensors, that can tell us about the condition of this infrastructure during normal times, and also condition of this infrastructure during disaster times. And of course, communication technologies such as social media can help us understand what people are talking about, what concerns they have. And this has been one of the sources of information in the field of crisis informatics for understanding the response of communities to disasters. So the bottom line is, we have more and more data to work with to better understand the pulse of communities and cities during times of crisis. We can harness this data and use them in development of different models, different data analytics models, from machine learning to deep learning models, from spatial analytics to computer vision types models, to better predict the behaviors of the systems, behaviors of the population, behaviors of the communities, and the extent of risk they have, the extent of resilience they demonstrate in the context of disasters, and use the model outputs in providing predictions and insights for decision makers, emergency managers, and communities themselves at different stages of a hazard, from a pre-hazard period to during the hazard, and as hazard dissipates during the recovery of the hazard. So in the next few slides, I will just demonstrate some solutions using different types of data that my research lab has been focusing on over the past few years in augmenting the capacities for responding to disasters using different types of data. And these are just examples for showing how these different types of data and technologies can help augment different capacities of communities at different stages of disasters. Next slide, please. I start with the first technology, which is using location data for quantifying hurricane preparedness and community susceptibility. Location-based data, which is the data that can be harnessed from the cell phones that people are using, and can be aggregated and anonymized so that it can be protective of the privacy. And we have seen the use of these types of data in the pandemic, and understanding how people respond to protective measures and stay at home orders and social distancing orders. But the use of this data has not been fully utilized for other types of disasters. Here we show a study that we did in the context of Hurricane Harvey in Houston, that we use this location-based data to quantify how early communities start preparing for the impending hurricane by evaluating the patterns of visits to different critical facilities, such as grocery stores, gas stations, pharmacies, home improvement stores. And by analyzing the patterns of visits, we identify which communities have, which areas have prepared well for the hurricane, and which communities have not prepared well. And under-preparedness for communities or areas that decided to shelter in place, it can be increasing the risk. And when we juxtapose that with the patterns of evacuation, that again can be evaluated with this same location-based data, we can identify the extent of evacuation in different areas. We can identify areas that have low evacuation and low preparedness, and those are the hotspots of a susceptibility. And that's what you see in these maps, just as examples that we can proactively identify areas that are susceptible based on their extent of preparedness and lack of evacuation. And this evaluation can be done before the hurricane landing, and based on the location-based data, we can quantify the extent of preparedness and evacuation and identify and focus on areas that are here shown in red, that these are hotspots of susceptibility. Why? Because they are underprepared and they have not evacuated extensively. Next slide, please. The second example is the use of other types of data, which is satellite images for automated building damage assessment. One of the main challenges in aftermath of large-scale disasters, such as what we are seeing right now in Turkey, is the rapid assessment of the extent of damages, especially to the buildings. And this assessment is critical for providing resources and providing relief material and funding for homeowners and residents to rebuild. And usually these types of assessments are done by underground inspectors, which usually takes time. And over the recent years, there has been a growing interest in use of satellite images and using computer vision techniques for automatically and rapidly classifying the extent of damages to the building. So this is an example of a recent study that we have done in the context of Hurricane Ida that happened in Louisiana last year. And we developed a computer vision model that can accurately determine the extent of building damage using high-resolution satellite images in matter of minutes. So these satellite images are usually available within 48 hours after the event, and we can feed them into our model and accurately classify building damage and the extent of damages the same way that FEMA inspectors would assess the damages if they go on the ground and assess the buildings. And this could significantly expedite the resource allocation for responding to these damages. Again, another technology, satellite images, meeting computer vision technology for an important disaster response task, which is building damage assessment. Next slide, please. Another way we can evaluate damages is based on the level of cell phone activities. Many communities across the world are using cell phones. And here we show an example of a study that we did to use Mapbox telemetry-based data. Mapbox provides this telemetry-based data to certain partners, and my research lab is one of the partners, that they determine the extent of fluctuation in cell phone activities in different areas. And these are aggregated data, so very privacy protective. And based on anomalies and fluctuations in cell phone activities, we can identify which areas have been impacted significantly, which could supplement the information that we can get from satellite images. This is an example that we did in the context of Hurricane Harvey. And we evaluated whether anomalous cell phone activities could be reliable indicators of the extent of damage in an area. And our analysis showed that yes, we can use cell phone activity fluctuations as a very reliable source of data to determine the extent of damage. The highly anomalous activities, either very high activity or very low activity after a disaster, could indicate significant damage and significant impact in those areas. Again, another technology is cell phone data and use of that in spatial analytics to identify high impact areas and high impact hotspots. Next slide, please. Another example that is widely used is use of social media. People use social media to communicate their status during normal day-to-day life and also during crisis. Here I show an example of a study we used to use topic modeling, event detection techniques to identify what are different topics that people are talking about during Hurricane Harvey at different times of the crisis, so that we can identify, for example, which areas are suffering from power outage, which areas are complaining about their water quality, which areas are still having issues about access to critical facilities. And this information can be harnessed through the Twitter APIs and analyzed through machine learning techniques, natural language processing techniques, event detection techniques, to identify the locations of those events, which are power outages or boil water notices, and used to inform emergency managers and public officials about where the impacts are and make the response and emergency relief operations more efficient. Again, the technology is social media, meeting machine learning techniques such as natural language processing and event detection techniques for improving the situational awareness during disasters. Next slide, please. The last use case that I want to demonstrate is the use of location-based data as well as credit card transaction data for monitoring recovery. Usually monitoring recovery is done using surveys that are sent to households to ask them, how well they are recovered. But this information has significant lag, and this has tremendous impact on allocation of recovery resources. So here we demonstrate the use of location-based data, aggregated location-based data, along with the credit card transaction data. Why these data sets are important for monitoring recovery? Because people will not be able to do their normal day-to-day life activities if they have endured impacts because of the disaster, if they cannot access facilities to use their credit cards or implement their life activities. And all of these provide good proxy about the lifestyle changes in the community. And if we can use these data sets effectively, like the example I show here, we can identify which areas are recovering faster, which areas are recovering slower, based on the time it takes for the life activities evaluated based on the patterns of credit card transactions and patterns of trips to different points of interest, such as restaurants, grocery stores, pharmacies, etc., after the disaster, going back to the pre-disaster patterns. So we can set up the pre-disaster patterns at a steady state and see how long does it take after the disaster for these patterns to go back to the normal, to measure the trajectory of the recovery. And then we identify which areas have delayed recovery and prioritize those areas for resource allocation so that we can expedite the recovery of those areas. Again, the technology here is data obtained from credit card transactions or online transactions, products, location-based data, and use them in a spatial analytics to identify hotspots of a slow recovery in the community. Next slide, please. So I demonstrated some examples of different types of data sets, different types of technologies. But one of the important things in leveraging this big data and AI for improving disaster resilience is the use of responsible AI principles. So in one of the studies that we recently implemented, we identified 6 important prepositions for what responsible AI is for implementation in disaster resilience. I just quickly read them for you. First, AI systems used for disaster resilience must promote equity and fairness considering diverse stakeholders. So many of the data sets that I mentioned here have issues of imbalance, and data imbalance can introduce unfairness in the analytics. So essentially, it can negatively impact the equity of disaster response if you are not aware of these data imbalances and account for these data imbalances in developing analytics techniques. Another proposition is AI systems should facilitate bias mitigation in data analysis and decision-making. AI systems also should be explainable and transparent to gain broader trust. So usually machine learning, deep learning techniques, and data analytics in general are considered to be black box, but we have to develop these models to be more explainable and transparent so that the decision makers and end users can trust them. AI system also should yield responsible insights for accountable decision making. For example, if an AI system predicts certain area gets flooded, but it doesn't, it is not going to get flooded, but it gets flooded, and communities endure impacts because they didn't respond to properly because of the incorrect prediction. Who is accountable and how it should be addressed? Inter-organizational coordination and public involvements are critical for creating AI systems for disaster risk management and disaster resilience. And finally, AI systems should attend to information privacy and security. Most of the information and data sets I provided here are highly privacy protective and aggregated, including the location-based data. But there are some data sets that might be used for responding to disasters that might intrude the privacy and security of the community. So we have to make sure that AI systems that are developed, they attend to the information privacy and security. So with that, I stop and would like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Ali. That was a very comprehensive presentation, full of great solutions, but also identifying the remaining challenges with AI. Would you have time for a quick question? Or do you gotta
Of course,
run
of
now?
course, of course.
Okay. I know you have to leave early. It's just a more kind of general question, building on your point about responsible AI. As AI begins to get mainstreamed into a lot that we're doing in disaster risk management, what are some of the things that we should be thinking about in terms of remaining challenges that need to be addressed? Could you expand?
Absolutely. I think one of the main important things is to follow a human-centric approach in developing AI systems. So for example, if we just develop AI system that can make good predictions without considering the end users that will be affected by those predictions, our systems will probably not be inclusive. It will not be fair and equitable. So I think human-centered approach for developing AI system for disaster context is the key. Another one is understanding the limitations in the data sets and also algorithmic biases that could be introduced. As we heard in the previous panel, we already know that disasters inequitably affect different subpopulations. If data and AI widens this inequality, they don't do any good. They make the situation worse. So for example, if the data and AI don't identify certain areas as impacted and resources are not allocated properly to that area that is already where underserved populations are living, that's a negative impact that AI has instead of a positive impact. So I think understanding the limitations in the data, algorithmic biases, and following a human-centered approach in developing AI systems and technologies is the principle we should follow.
Fantastic. Thank you again, Ali, for joining us. Sad to see you go and you cannot participate in the rest of the discussion, but we'll fill you in. Thank you again.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Sure. So next up, we have Lou Zaccarella, who is co-founder of the Intelligent Community Forum, which is exploring the intersection of communication technologies and economic and human development. And he is director at Space and Satellite Professionals International, SSPI, which is the world's largest nonprofit trade association for the commercial satellite industry. And I'll be putting more about Lou in the chat. Lou, over to you.
Thank you, Shefali, and thanks to Peter and the Arise group for inviting me. And I just want to compliment Ali. I've never met him before, but I'm willing to yield more of my time to hear more of him. I thought his presentation was particularly useful when it comes to the world that I live in, which is making sure that cities are becoming more intelligent. And I'll explain what that means. But it fundamentally means that any place that a human being calls home, we think can be a great place to live. That's our fundamental proposition. So let me speak briefly about that. Next slide, please. Yeah, you know, if mayors ruled the world, there was a great book by Professor Benjamin Barber. We would probably have a better place to live overall. When you think about it, national governments don't pick up your garbage. They don't keep your streets safe. They really don't. Henry Kissinger even said about 10 years ago that the national government, the way it was originally designed, is no longer functional. And so what we're continuing to see are attempts to do things at the national level that are much better done at the local level. And we've proved that through the work we've done with about 200 cities. But here's an interesting data point that we've been looking at. You've heard a lot about the smart city movement, and they are not measurably improving the future of our cities. They've targeted the low-hanging fruit, making sure your water systems are observed and your lighting systems are digitized. There are obviously improvements they've made in certain areas, but in many cases, to refer back to what Ali was saying and Shefali, what you were talking about with regard to the intentionality of communications, they are increasingly seen as dehumanizing in many parts of the world. There are a lot of exceptions, but again, I will talk about that later. Next slide, please. What we have done at the Intelligent Community Forum, we've been doing it for about 20 years, is trying to take a more holistic look at the places that people live. The idea that somehow, as someone said in an earlier session, technology is to be worshipped is actually violating probably the first commandment. I don't know much about Mosaic law. I know I've probably broken most of the commandments, but the first one is pretty important, and that is not to worship a false idol. And I think that what we have tried to do is to look at intensifying the human experience, not digitizing cities. The technology is just a tool. It's what it's always been throughout human history. And to put it in front of the human experience diminishes exactly the kinds of places we're trying to create. These are the 6 factors upon which we measure cities. Each year, cities submit to us reams and reams of data along these 6 criteria. You'll notice that sustainability is one of them. We have looked at models in cities around the world where really remarkable things are happening, of the like that Ali just talked about. But what's really happening is that they're improving the quality of the life of people there. They're giving people confidence, and they're manifesting themselves in 2 significant ways. Economic expression. We are seeing, places that have a good disaster preparedness and good environment being invested in, and they're also beginning to keep their talent home. The real action today, if you want to look, is in the non-marquee cities, the small and mid-sized cities where you have 200,000-300,000 people, Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, places like that, where people are now staying put, investment is pouring in, quality of life is improving, and you have access to the countryside in about 5 minutes, as opposed to New York, where if you want to get a bus here, it's Hail Marys. Not a great experience. So that's really what's been going on and how cities are using sustainability today. Next slide, please. And Shefali, please flag me when I get near the end of my run here. What we're doing at the Intelligent Community Forum is providing an international framework to accelerate the holistic growth of cities. Again, it's really designed to take a look at technology as sort of the base, kind of like the railroad in the old days. If the railroad ran through your community, you had an advantage, but you had to take care of that. You had to leverage that advantage by putting things on it, whether it be coal or minerals or, actually where I grew up, mint. Whatever the innovations were around that infrastructure allows you then to do the kinds of things that would make your community prosperous. The internet is the same thing. Communications are the same thing today. But the question is, how intelligently are you using these applications? Are you using them to, for example, do what Astera, an Israeli company, is allowing cities to do, which is by satellite monitoring their potable water supplies so that they know exactly where their potable water is. Little bitty things that continue to add to the quality of life. Next question, please. Next question. Next slide. So that's what we do, but what intelligent cities really do is, as I said, they intensify the human experience. And I think it's no secret today that there's a sense that we are technologically wonderful, that somehow we're going to engineer our way out of every solution. But the fact of the matter is, it's only going to be done as tribes, as enlightened tribes. And those things are communities. And so we have to understand how to get that right. And that's a more humanistic approach. As Al Gore said a couple of years ago, the only endless natural resource that doesn't pollute the air and the water is the human mind. And we need to excavate it. And that, again, that's a proposition by which we run on. So we have digital technology as our foundation, but current economic, culture, and social mediocrity are things that are to be overcome. And what we're seeing out there is that mayors really are running the world. They're seizing their own destinies for their communities. And these are expressed in the 200 or so cities that have been designated as intelligent, places like Taiwan, where they use every one of their AI and city apps to develop a citizen-first consciousness. So they have such an enormous trust in their government because they see that their government is focused on the human experience. And when I talk about getting a bus in New York, in Taiwan, you can actually call up your own city bus. One will come to you at your request. We've also been talking about only the technology we need. Mitchell, South Dakota is a great example of that. 30, 40 years ago, they lost 30% of their population. By applying intelligent technologies and just the technology they needed, they've recovered that and more. And again, have become a great place to live. One of the other elements I wanted to refer to is bridging the digital divide. Satellites have made it so that the environment in which we live now allows us to make the claim that the middle of nowhere is no more. And the question is, are you able to implement the infrastructure properly so that you actually do eliminate digital divides and that you can allow it to impact technology, healthcare, and education? And again, intelligent communities are doing this by following the ICF method. And quality of life has become now an economic advantage in places you probably never heard of, like the two I've cited here. Next slide, please. You know, we've been very fortunate in that thought leaders have inspired our movement. I wanted to point out the gentleman from Taiwan, the former president, who had an idea of making Taiwan an intelligent island, leveraging the nation's consummate intelligence, city by city by city. So his job was, as part of a national plan, was to designate as many cities as possible as intelligent communities. He thought that that groundswell would lift the productivity and the humanity of Taiwan. And he's been enormously successful in that regard, and it's actually become a model for other places, including the state of Ohio, which has now been designated as an intelligent state. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I think I'm at the end of my talk here, but the idea is really that the middle of nowhere is no more, and that we can all be connected. 3 satellites in geosynchronous orbit can cover the entire Earth with one broadband footprint. That's swell. That's great. There's a lot of data flowing through it. But what are you going to do with it? Are you going to enable human beings to have, as you said, Shefali, that mindful experience, that intentional experience where they are honored and where they can call any place they want to live home, stay there, and contribute to it? We think it's possible. We've begun to see examples of that, as I said, in the 200 cities that we work with as part of our membership. So I'm happy to speak with anybody further about that. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Lou. That was fascinating, and I look forward to diving deeper during our discussion. We're going to transition over to our third and final panelist now. We're going to hear from Andres Mera, who is the CEO of GRIO, a social enterprise that is working to democratize earthquake early warnings by using low-cost sensors and working with citizen scientists in Mexico, Haiti, and Nepal. Over to you, Andy.
Thanks very much, Shefali. Can you hear me okay? Yes, good. Okay, we're going to talk about earthquakes, which is in a lot of people's minds. And it often happens in the world which I inhabit, which is that earthquakes is not discussed at all for 10 years, and then suddenly everyone talks about it. Well, today we're going to talk about how to mitigate some of the problems. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Yeah, I like to start with some personal experiences. I feel there was something in the last panel which was said, which was true to me, which was that sometimes technologies are not fit for purpose, or they are readapted. I think the term was square peg and a round hole. And I feel that many of people on my team have had very personal experiences with earthquakes, and it really does make a big difference, not just on the product development side, but the way it's implemented and the long-term sustainability of these projects. So I just mentioned these two because I was in Haiti immediately after the earthquake, and I ended up living there for a few years. And Mexico is my home. And here you can see something that happened 2 streets away from mine where a building fell down. This is the sort of scenes that we're seeing in Turkey. And this is the sort of chaos where everything breaks down, all infrastructure breaks down for a certain period of time. And we have to figure out how to live through that. Next slide, please. I guess we don't need to dwell on this, but earthquakes have a greater impact than most other natural disasters. And it's something that can be mitigated in several ways. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah, so obviously the best way to deal with earthquakes is to build properly, because the earthquakes don't kill anybody. The buildings that fall down is what kills people. So what you need to do is you need to build properly, and that is not possible in almost every country in the world. Japan actually is one of a handful of countries that has developed a system, a digital technology where people can get a warning seconds, or in some cases even 1 or 2 minutes before the shaking is felt, which doesn't sound like a lot, but I can tell you from my own experience, it does mean a lot, because you have the opportunity to prepare yourself, perhaps to leave the building, perhaps to get under furniture. And this very office that I'm in, I've had 2 or 3 earthquake early warnings, which have given me sufficient time to get out into the street. So they're very important, but they can be prohibitively expensive. And the paradox is that the countries that most need these systems are the ones that can least afford them. So it's a shame that not people can have this. Not many people can have this. Next slide, please. Yeah, as I mentioned before, this divide. I think the last panelist mentioned that the digital divide. Nowadays many people share similar digital technologies like cell phones, but nonetheless it's hard to reach, especially those people in very rural settings in developing countries, and that's one of our challenges. Next slide, please. Right, so our system is based on a concept that we didn't develop. It's been around since 1900s as an idea, and this is an early warning system. And it doesn't mean prediction, because that's not possible. But what it does mean is that when shaking starts, any sensors, in the old days, it used to be people with radio relays, but sensors automatically know that there is shaking, which you have to characterize using algorithms. And then these algorithms will separate the passing trucks from the earthquakes, and in real time tell nearby populations that there's something about to happen. That is the basis of an earthquake early warning system. And we've worked hard to sort of deal with all of these components and using off-the-shelf type technologies and our open source community. Next. At the basis this is one of our early open source projects, but the very basis of this is an IoT solution where we allow people to build their own sensors. We develop more sophisticated ones that have cellular technology, but this is the most simple version. And this technology allows people to place sensors that would normally have cost $5,000 to $10,000, but this way can cost $100 to $300, which means immediately we get density, which is what you need for an early warning. Next. So some images I'm not showing here, but there is all sorts of web technologies which are used for this data. And so basically in real time, we can get the data coming in, processed, and out. And again, this is all stuff that we've published open source, but we also have some proprietary elements, machine learning using neural networks, which will identify different types of waves. Next, please. Okay, so this is, yeah, just to show that our solution, our IoT-based solution, is much cheaper than other solutions, and that we've implemented in a number of countries now. Next, please. So one great example here is Haiti. In Haiti, we have a partnership with the government. It's a very difficult place to operate. I was just there a few months ago. Safety is a huge issue right now. But we also have a partnership with the leading telecoms. And I think one of the main points I wanted to make here was that partnerships is everything. You know, we're talking about technology today, but that's really the easy part. The difficult part is making something that lasts, making something that people understand and use, and making something that can be used that will be effective. And in Haiti, that was done because we have the government helping us and we have a telecommunications company helping us. Next, please. And these are the teams. So we have scientists and technology people. Next, please. And some of the partners we work with, Linux Foundation, who helps us with open source, a number of other agencies who help with funding, etc. That's it. I did it as quickly as I could. I know we've run over time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andy. That was fantastic. Thank you both for your presentations. I want to start us off with some general questions that tie back into the broader themes that I discussed in my introduction and that obviously have appeared in actually both the panel presentations this morning. And then I'll hope to bring you all into this more robust kind of discussion. Andy, I'll stay with you because you just presented. So a quick question to you about your presentation. As a social enterprise, you work in some really challenging environments, which you've just outlined for us, both physical and economic. Perhaps you could touch a bit more on some of the partnerships that allow you to be effective. You briefly mentioned that in the Haiti slide. Could you elaborate on that? Because you're truly trying to accomplish the important task of bridging digital divides while also trying to be successful as an enterprise. How do you do that? And what are the partnerships that have helped you do that?
That's right. Yeah, that's right, Chef Ali. So we actually started off without really understanding what the term social enterprise meant. So we thought we were a normal startup. And in a normal startup, the main idea, well, any business is funding. So we were able to draw funds from a number of places, but the difficulty with social impact is your bottom line isn't just financial, and so our challenge was to be a sort of a startup in the sense that we were really providing a market solution, that we were market driven, that we weren't just providing things that we thought people needed to save lives. But we thought people wanted and actually had immense value. And so to bridge that alongside being a cool tech company, which grows. And so, yeah, partnerships were important. We've sort of been able to tap into funding from foundations and large organizations, as well as development banks, as well as the private sector. And I think it's key that we sort of blend those and we show value to both sides. Other partnerships are people just on the ground that get things done, because you can't operate in rural Haiti or rural Mexico or rural Chile or rural Nepal without having really, really effective partners. So.
Yep, that's a great point. I want to bring in Lou. Do you want to share any comments, because you do a lot of partnership-centered work in the intelligent community domain? Could you talk to us a bit about what kinds of partnerships are really effective for disaster risk reduction and sustainable outcomes?
Yeah, well, just Shefali, thank you for that question. Within the city itself, most of the internal partnerships, the partnerships that are necessary, get formed. What's interesting with regard to our work is when we go into a place, there will, because of who we are, sometimes we get good attention, but you'll have 12 people around the table because the mayor told the different departments or whatever they have to be there. It will be communications, real estate, whatever. And often I see that they're handing each other their business cards, especially in the bigger cities. And what we try to do is to connect those groups, get them talking, but also three primary groups: the private sector, the local government sector, and the academic or the intellectual class. In cities that are successful in doing the types of things that we're talking about here today, they have continuous working groups and they work toward a goal. What's been interesting about our project is that to be designated as an intelligent community is good for the economic development group first, because they say, hey, we're an intelligent community, so you can invest here, as opposed to that so smart place next door. But what really goes on is that they look at the intelligent community idea in the awards program, of course, that we have, and it becomes part of a continuous process, almost like a practice that they have, like a yoga practice or something, however you want to define it. And over time, over sometimes 10 or 12 years, we've been working with some of these Taiwanese cities, you begin to see these developments, this communication, these partnerships form, and then they continue to reach out to the rest of this country, the state, and then the national organizations get involved and start feeding in their resources. So that's how we typically see it working.
That's fascinating and very useful to our work at the Arise US Network and the UNDRR, which is so much about cultivating those public-private people partnerships. So
yeah, just quickly, you have to reshape the culture. They have to think differently about who they are, and in most places, it's getting them to become the best version of themselves. They've kind of forgotten who they are culturally. I don't know why. Well, I think I know why, but that's a whole other conference.
It is, yes. Partnerships is a whole other discussion. But a second theme that's interesting to a lot of us working in the DRR space is really around assessing the quality and access to digital infrastructures, right? The material stuff that makes up digital tech and makes it possible. You have all talked about sensors, satellites, servers, but also the acknowledgement that that leads to digital divides due to issues of access, ownership, knowledge hierarchies that I alluded to in my introduction. So I guess my question, I'm opening this up now for our panel as well as the previous panel as we wind up this session, is how can we bridge divides in digital infrastructure, knowledge systems, and enable equity outcomes, right? When you're co-developing digital tech, do you consider how it can be co-produced with diverse communities of users, recognizing that there are diverse ways of knowing, diverse knowledge systems outside of what we would consider Western scientific frameworks? I'm particularly thinking of indigenous ways of knowing. Is that something any one of you would like to comment on?
I can say something. We make assumptions which don't always turn out right about what digital technologies are most apt for different communities, and we do that because we want to reach as many people as possible. And so, as an example, we learned early on in our field that when you're dealing with people who are most vulnerable to earthquakes, they can't use an app. We assume everyone has apps. They might have a smartphone. In Mexico, penetration of smartphones, I think, is about 80%, but they won't have a data plan. And so, instantly we have to rethink how to get to people who we assumed were accessible. And there's many other ways to do that.
Yeah. And Shefali, there's a digital divide, even among not necessarily the poor all the time, but also the lower classes or dispersed tribes, as I like to call them. And honestly, our experience has been that it's the incumbent carriers sometimes who just don't want to go into certain parts of the city and wire it. I mean, I'm not even talking about satellite. Satellite can cure a lot of evils across the digital divide. I'm talking about fiber. And there's battle after battle that goes on, even in the United States, to get municipal fiber networks built. Dublin, Ohio had to sue the state to get its municipal network built so that it could connect its schools and its hospitals, right? Canada, it's indigenous people. Rogers has a project going on up there now. So a lot of this is legislative, but the telecommunications industry, and I don't want to bash anyone here, but the telecommunications industry does lobby like hell to protect the sweet spots of their markets. But it's unfair to the rest of the community, which could, accelerate if it was allowed to build out into some of these places. And we work with investors in dozens of models around the world where that is done very readily once the legislation just loosens itself up.
Can I just say, Lou, sorry, that I've seen a lot of this in Latin America where communities get together. They have a
I was just about to
backhaul.
chime on that, Andreas.
Oh, yeah,
sorry.
sure.
Oh, sorry, Jack.
Yeah, so being at a historically Black college, one of the premier brands of the historically Black colleges right here in Central Alabama, 32 miles from the capital. Again, these are major challenges. If you look at the Black Belt, which consists of it's known for its Black soil, but it's also known for a lot of challenges, particularly when you look at digital development. So originally from northeastern Arkansas, and when I go back to where I was born and raised, to where I'm at now, these are major challenges definitely for African Americans that are in rural spaces. Again, there are plenty of African Americans still in rural spaces that are looking to grow and develop. I'm quite sure people have heard about challenges in the Black Belt regarding just plain drainage, sewage treatment. So I'll stop there. But again, it's definitely a huge issue.
Yeah.
Continue on, Andreas.
Well,
That's it. That was a good
Andreas,
point.
you talk about satellite backhaul. You talk about very small aperture terminal satellites, VSATs. Very easy to put into it. It's what we do during a disaster. You'll put in a very small aperture terminal network, and within minutes, you're communicating out from an earthquake. You probably know that better than I do, right? And so we've got a crisis connectivity charter that we've implemented through the satellite industry, where that capability is just there whenever anybody needs it. We just move the satellite over, and these private sector satellite companies agree to give bandwidth. Well, I say, why the hell not just have them there all the time for anybody that really needs them, based on the economic output of a community? I mean, we could actually do that. And go to northern Mexico, where Viasat has its community Wi-Fi project. They've improved the quality of life there just by going in with that network. And that was a national government initiative. This stuff is the communications part of this is the easy part. And I don't know why we have such problems with it, but I don't know how somebody.
I don't know in the US, but I remember, because I used to go to these Facebook had open sourced. I don't know where it is now, this project, these sort of community cell towers. And I think there was a very good business case where the large operators would end up buying the users from these small companies. And so you could go and get a community in rural Mexico for 200 people and sell those users onto the big companies. So there is a business case there. I guess they need to figure it out.
There's certainly a business case there. And again, and Shefali cut us off if we're running close. But what we're seeing, and I mentioned Mitchell, South Dakota, which had lost 30% of its population, and we see it, throughout the United States. This is an investment that government should be making, because the return on it is the growth of an ecosystem, a private sector, because you have good communications, right? We saw that in Sweden. Sweden was supposed to be this great socialist country. They put in an open access fiber network, and you had 115 carriers go in there and provide competitive telecommunications. And within years, they were up around Singapore and South Korea and these places in terms of competitiveness. They were starting companies left and right. And that can happen anywhere, because there's some kid in the Philippines right now picking stuff off a garbage pile who could do just as well as you or I if they had the connectivity, they had access to that education. So, again, we can certainly do this stuff.
Yeah, this is great. Thank you so much
to
all of you. Thank you so much to all 6 panelists for your great insights today. I know the audience is going to take away some really great ideas around digital applications and transformations in terms of how digitization is really working for DRR outcomes to enable safety and well-being in open, democratic, and decentralized ways. While also recognizing that there are remaining challenges moving forward, including around data quality, access, infrastructure, knowledge divides, and all the stuff that we've been talking about in terms of the need for more convergent partnerships. We look forward to summarizing these discussions and presenting them to the regional platform to consider some actionable next steps. Thank you to the audience for your active participation, your questions and insights. We really look forward to sharing a recording of the symposium on our website soon, so you can look back at it, reflect on it some more. So thank you, everyone, and take care.
Thank you very much indeed. The recording will be posted on the website shortly. Thank you very much, folks. Excellent, excellent discussion. Thank you.
Have a
Thank you.